You look at me, all you can see is the last hurdle before wine. But this actually needs to happen. My name is Tamás Bereczky and I work with EUPATI, and I've been in patient advocacy for many years. And my task now is to ask the rapporteurs, and I hope there are rapporteurs, from the 3 or 4 previous sessions, because we also had an online session, to report back to us, to you, about what the main outcomes were in these breakout groups, breakout sessions. Now, the faster you do this, or we do this, you get the point. And then I will try to, together with you, try to sum up to some extent what the day was about. But this was a long day. We had the General Assembly in the morning, and then from noon we started. And there have been a number of exciting points that emerged. Also, if you follow the conversation on Twitter, which I recommend that you do, that's been extremely exciting to see how various topics emerged and what was there. So, who is ready to report back from there, or have you agreed who will report back from the various sessions? I have names for the session leaders. So Stuart, Jan, Chi, and also I will ask Camilla to recommend someone for the online session. Did you agree on who will report back? The room is silently waiting, patiently and silently waiting. Because if not, then I will have to ask the session leaders to come and join me on stage and give a short summary. Stuart, are you in the room? You are. Jan, I can see you walking up here. Yes, but it didn't work. Chi, did you agree who will report? Or you come? Can you come forward, please? And Camilla, I need to understand who will speak about the online session. I saw you crossing the room a second ago. You are? Yes. Excellent. Hello, Zsófia. Hello. Another Hungarian in the room. That's good to know. So, what were the key lessons, the key takeaways, the most important points that were brought up in your sessions? Let's start with Stuart. Are you happy to start?
Sure.
Thank you.
The outcome of my session is on these bits of paper. I hope you can all read it. So just to remind those who weren't in the session, this was trying to make some sense and context of the gaps in patient engagement that we had identified within Work Package 2. We acknowledge that Paradigm is one of many initiatives that are addressing certain gaps in the patient engagement landscape, and the gaps that we've identified are perhaps more than we would ever practically or realistically be able to address within the context of Paradigm. So the 2 questions for the main session were to help prioritize a long list of gaps that we'd identified, and what would be practical and reasonable to address within the context of Paradigm. So what within the sort of 12 months and the tools and frameworks and guidances that we're already creating, which of those gaps could we incorporate within those existing tools, and were there tools perhaps that could be developed that we hadn't developed as yet. And the second question was to do a landscape check, acknowledging again other initiatives may be addressing some of the gaps that we've already identified. So we had a wonderful session, a very interactive session and very knowledgeable session from the participants there, really highlighting some of those gaps that were already being covered and where we really wanted to get to. So where do we identify? I think probably the top 3 that we came out were around sort of some clearer descriptions of the criteria followed to identify patient representatives needed. That really came out loud and clear across those 3 sessions, so that's something we can certainly build upon. And including dissemination and communication plan, sharing both the process and the outcomes of that patient engagement initiative, and that was another one that was ranked very highly indeed. And then the other two that sort of came fairly highly on that, the proposal of metrics to measure patient engagement impact. Of course, we already know about that, and Work Package 3 are already developing a patient engagement monitoring and evaluation framework there. But there was some conditional feedbacks that we had that we can certainly feed into that session there. And the other big gap was the lack of reporting on patient engagement practices per se. And that was a sort of overarching gap that we'd identified from our analysis. And that's really some much better clarity about what was done with who and when, using what methodology, and what were the outcomes. And so we've got lots of extra information in here that after this session we're going to make some better understanding of. I'm looking at lots of dots. I'm sure when I close my eyes I'm going to be looking at dots and colours and post-it notes for quite some time. In terms of what are we going to do with this next, we're now going to feed in these gaps that we've identified tonight to Work Package 4, who are creating those tools, which is a session tomorrow morning. That's session number 7. And so now we can then, in that session, we can then use some of these gaps that have been identified and give some context to those gaps, and also how they can be translated into content that, within those current tools. And so that's what we're going to do next. So I think that was our main findings from the day, but I'd just like to thank all our participants. That was a really useful check for us, and it really has really helped us get down from quite a large list of gaps to something that's very tangible that we can use and work with.
Thank you very much. From those who participated in that particular session, is there anything you would like to add, or anything that you think would be important to point out? I count until 5 for you to raise your hands, and if not, then let's move on. Zsófia, are you okay to report back from the online session? Thank you.
Just trying to get my thoughts together. Yes, hi everyone. So we had a really exciting online session this afternoon talking about communications and cultural change connected to patient engagement. And the idea of the session came a little bit from a personal experience of mine as well, but I was not alone with this. When we're sitting in a room of patient engagement experts and people who really believe in patient engagement, it's quite easy to make our points, and it's really inspiring to talk to each other. But what happens when we go back to our colleagues who are working in another department, in another country, in another world? And how do we make our case for patient engagement, and how do we communicate about this? How do we reach beyond the easy targets? And so this was the idea of the session, and I had a slide on you standing on one side of the depression and the colleague standing on the other side, and you're saying, come over here, but then the colleague says, how? And it's a better case if they say how. What if they ask why? And so we were talking about, it was a really good session about, we gave a little bit of overview of PFMD, Paradigm and EUPATI, what we are doing together, what we are trying to achieve. And then we had a perspective on the industry, communicating and implementing that kind of cultural change that we are talking about. And we were trying to, sort of outline the challenges, but also what are the practical solutions and how can comms support in overcoming these challenges. And I think one of the very important things I heard as takeaway is, if there is reluctance, we need to understand why, and we need to better understand what are the fears, what are the problems, why is the person reluctant to change things. And maybe, the status quo is always easier. If you have to change your ways of working, it's always a challenge for anyone. So when the person asks, will I have a higher workload? How is this going to impact what I do on a daily basis? Is this going to be really complicated? We need to be equipped with answers to this, and we need to be equipped with some tools to make this happen and to make this easier. I have a little bit of experience of the EFPIA patient engagement strategy becoming, a reality and being implemented. And we were talking a lot about how to go from KPIs and objectives to really changing hearts and minds when the person is not doing it because they need to report back. They are doing it because they believe that this is the right way to do things and it's actually adding value. So from the industry session, I also took away a sense that there's need to be leadership behind. When we talk about big organizations, multinational companies, there needs to be a sense of leadership, and it has to be the CEO, it has to be the director who says, I personally believe in this, and I personally believe that this is the way. And this is a very strong message, and in big organizations, it has to happen from top down as well, but let's not forget the bottom up. Let's not forget that we all can do little things to make it happen. So it's also about thinking big, but doing small and addressing this on our personal levels. And then talking about, so that we also had the patient perspective in communications. So what do we really need in order to make sure that when patient engagement happens, the patient is truly, able to provide valuable input and be part of this process. And I think we eventually, just come to the next topic, naturally to the training topic, because there's so much about awareness. So communications is going to help raise awareness about issues, and within the patient community, obviously there is a challenge to reaching out to smaller patient organizations, to geographically, outreach to countries, to patient organizations in countries, and we really need to make sure that there is awareness about the issues. We really need to make sure that patients have the chance to participate in trainings that enable them to understand better, how a drug is developed, what's happening, what are the touch points where they can engage and how they can engage in these touch points, and so this was leading us really to the next session, which was about training. And I don't want to only say that it's only the patient organizations who need, or patients and patient organizations who need training when it comes to patient engagement, because it's also the industry who needs training in getting this right. And then we were also talking about really, how do you get this right? And there are some very basic principles when it comes to working together, and it's about transparency, it's about getting the engagement at the right moment in the process, and it's really about evidencing and documenting what are the things that are happening, and then giving feedback, and based on the evidence that you've got, you need to come back and say, this was meaningful, and this is how things were taken into consideration, and this is the process, but this is the result then, and you were part of this process. So I think there were many interesting points and many good discussions. We now have to think about how do we turn these into concrete results of the session, in terms of how can we go back to the patient community and say, these are the bits of the toolkit that you should have in order to be able to effectively communicate with each other. How do we go back to the industry perspective and say, these are the things that you need to have in your pocket, and maybe this is case studies, evidencing the impact of patient engagement. And a lot of these things that came up, what is the need? What would make it easier to communicate? And I think this is also true for the patient community, that if they see that there is impact, they would be, more willing to engage, happier to engage, more willing to contribute with time and input. So I think that we will come up with a toolkit, but many of these things have already been addressed in EUPATI, in PFMD, and they are being addressed in Paradigm as well. So this is also a good reality check that what we are doing is actually addressing those needs. But I also think that we need to think together, how do we give these to people in an easier and more instant way so they can run away and communicate about the value of patient engagement.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Is anything that you would like to add from, if any one of you
yes,
participated
please,
in the...
My session co-contributors.
I mean, some of you were probably there in the or attended the online session, but if not, then let's just move on with Chi. And I was in the room, so I know that you did some really excellent work. And anyway, I want to thank you for the engagement. You've done so much for this event, and I don't want to expose you now, but thank you so much. This has been, yeah.
Thanks goes to also my co-organizers here, so it wasn't done alone. In our session, we shared some cases, and we call them good practices because they actually show you what they did to involve patients and what were the impact and benefits, and we wanted to share that. And then the purpose of the session was to share these 3 different examples from 3 very different perspectives, and then go into a workshop where the participants could ask more and fill out a worksheet that looks like this to kind of see how they could take those learnings and maybe apply in their work. So really quickly, we had one case from the industry, and they presented 2 separate projects. We had one case from the kind of more national perspective, from the academic research side, and then we had one revolving around collaboration between a patient's organization and biomedical. The common point in these cases was how did they implement the patient's engagement quality guidance that was co-created in a multi-stakeholder environment last year. Last year I've been speaking a lot. The discussions were very lively. The 3 groups were in the back of the room. I'm already apologizing if I couldn't get all the key points that you feel that are key points here. We will definitely share everything after the open forum. But the key points that I went during the coffee break to the members in the different tables. This is actually really interesting what Zsófia said, because we heard similar things as well. There is a need to share. There is a need to share what did you do, what did you learn, so that others can learn as well. What were those challenges and how we can avoid it if we are doing something similar. Another thing we heard was using the quality guidance actually gave us a framework to work together. Being new to each other in a new collaboration, it gave us something to think about together and set the scene. One of the quality criteria, the shared purpose, was mentioned that it is actually the most important, because that's when you set the scene for your collaboration. There was also mentioning about capability and capacity building, that's needed, not only from the patient side, but researchers, industry. And also that maybe patient organizations can also bridge some gap in facilitating the collaboration between the patient community and others, whether it's researchers or pharma. Another common point in our discussion was also a strong leadership is needed within an organization to drive it forward internally, to make things happen or accelerate things more. Yes, and so shared purpose, strong leadership, and then also going back to sharing cases and sharing knowledge, there was also, we discussed challenges as well. What would you experience as a challenge if you took these learnings and if you were to apply? In one table group, one challenge was, so if we share, then who can share and what? And in kind of what context? What does that mean contractually? And what should be shared so that it would be meaningful for others as well. So there were really, really good discussions, and we'll hopefully be able to gather everything into a concise list of, here it is, take it and run.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything that you would like to add to this from those who participated? Because your last comment actually leads us pretty well on to what Jan's group was talking about, and I know very well your work in this area, but what did you get out of the workshop?
Well, I mean, my compliance department is still working on what I can say on stage. No, I mean, if you run a workshop on legal agreements, you never know whether two people are in the room or more. That's why I was very curious about this workshop. And in the end, we had 7 very, very active tables where we discussed, and we really tried to do a workshop where people worked and were not going shopping, which I think has worked considerably well. And probably just as a background, I mean, we, as patient advocates, often see the issues that we, of course, need to sign contracts for the work that we do whenever there is an interface between patient organizations in industry and increasingly also with other partners, where we need to talk about intellectual property and confidentiality and liability and coverage of expenses and coverage of compensation for time and so on. And because this was getting increasingly difficult, WECAN, which is the work group of European Cancer Patient Advocacy Networks, which has 23 networks in it, which I'm also involved in, has done a survey in 2016 to look at the issues behind these contracts. And actually the 80 patient leaders that answered to it revealed that about only half of them understand the contracts they are getting, many of them signing them blindly. Everyone is spending about 5 hours on average on the whole administrative side of a collaboration, even if it's just for a speaker agreement or an advisory board meeting agreement and so on. And that's which led us to a collaborative effort that WECAN does and did with PFMD and with 12 companies, because we just didn't want to complain about the topic, but we really wanted to develop solutions. And we've had a very productive time over the past years, because we developed guiding principles, which is this. If you come across it, they are somewhere here, and everyone in our workshop got a copy. So that's guiding principles on all the different issues that are usually discussed in the contracts, discussing about the rationale why it is an issue, some examples, what kind of issues we see in contracts, and guiding principles, what, let's say, an agreed principle could be for a contract that is fairly protecting both sides and also fairly reflecting that kind of partnership. So when you do these kind of workshops, you never know how that works in the end and whether people want to discuss it. And the way we did it, we developed some kind of split personality. So we gave the exercise that, with the example, a case study that a patient advocate who knows about adherence and has done a lot of work on mobile apps is actually invited to a company advisory board meeting, is asked for a 15-minute presentation in the morning, and in the afternoon for a 45-minute panel discussion, and gets a contract doing that with a 2-page contract, which we provided to the participants, with some communication between the agency and the patient advocate about the, let's say, the conditions of travel, and this brochure actually. We gave each table the task to look at 2 terms of the contract, think about from a patient perspective, would they accept these terms, and then change their identity and think about what the patient advocates would actually reject and why, and then put themselves into perspective of an industry person. Would they accept the changes, and which one would they expect and which one wouldn't they? So I think that's worked very well, and I didn't do Swiss timing. We were 27 minutes late because the people were discussing such a lot, and I had to cut down discussions at the end, which I think was a great result. So I don't want to talk for half an hour about compliance issues, because probably you don't want to have that just before networking dinner. What are we doing with this? I think it was a good discussion because everybody saw the whole issue from two sides, and everything was very constructive, and we thought about how do we tackle these things. What's happening next is we have these guiding principles, so they're published. We are developing together with PFMD reference contracts, which doesn't mean they are templates you can just sign, but they should be the basis for future contracts. And we have developed one for an advisory board agreement, and 3 more templates are currently under consultation in the multi-stakeholder work group of 12 companies and patient advocates and a couple of legal experts. And we are going to get reference contracts for consultancy, collaboration, speaker agreements as well. And they are going to be published hopefully very soon, that everybody has a reference, and we hope we get in the future to a situation where there's this underlying reference contract and a good justification why we deviate from it for specific collaborations. But I think a couple of very striking issues came up. And on one hand, because this connects all the different topics of the collaboration, we discussed a bit about fair market value, and the National Health Council is doing tremendous work on that at the moment with building a fair market value calculator. And so Leonor was actually saying we might bring this to Europe, and PFMD is the platform for this. And at the same time, the guiding principles and the things we did here in Europe with that collaboration project might also translate well into discussions that are going on in the US. So there's way to take this forward. We're also going to develop a toolbox. But I think what the outcome is of the workshop is really that people understood the issue, because in the beginning we had the discussion, Nicolas and I, does it really make sense to have non-legal people talking about a legal contract? And I think what I felt as vibes from the discussions is that everybody felt, in a way, it's their thing. It's sometimes the administrative side, but it defines, do we co-own, do we co-create, or do the advocates just come and contribute and deliver and actually lose their right on the things that they do there? And I think that kind of discussion is very fruitful and very important, and I think we made great steps forward. One of the things that also came up is the importance of trade associations, because there were 2 ladies from ABPI in there, and we also said there's a lot of, let's say, divergence in the interpretation of all these rules, so probably the trade associations smiling can play a role on this as well. So that's the outcome. I think it was really productive. I really had fun. I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope that everyone takes it home and thinks about, when we do these kind of agreements, whatever, in co-ownership and co-creation, that we think, how do we put this in reality, that we can all make the best of it in the end.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from any one of you concerning any of the sessions? Because if not, then I know that Matthew wanted to say something else to you. Oh, there you are. So, because then we're done. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Go ahead.
Good evening again. So I would like to cite you the best tweet ever. I just read it, and the winner, because I have an internal debate with myself, what should be the best tweet ever. The winner is Anna Diaz from Alzheimer Europe, who tweeted, "What a great and interactive day, so much going on that I had barely any time to tweet." I think everybody would agree so. And I don't know if you're even in the room now. The contest is open tomorrow as well. So now it's finger food. Okay, it's only finger food. I know some of you have big appetite, but this is what we can provide. Finger food. That's okay. That's okay. There's plenty of restaurants around here. In the agenda, it's really written reception with drink, finger food, mingle, share your holiday experience, network, work, discuss, and have fun. This is literally what it's about, okay? You've done a lot of work now, so you can chill out, okay? There is a winner, there is a contest, who got the best holiday over summer. So, but back to business tomorrow morning. Okay, so we start 8:45 arrival time, signature, consent about our picture being taken, etc., etc. New badge, so if you want to change your shirt, you can. We have new badges for you. Okay, that's also possible. That's okay. If you don't want, we don't judge. Okay. Back to business. We're going to start again 9:15 with 3 parallel sessions, okay? So for you to know where you want to go, okay? Otherwise, it's going to be a mess with 250 people in the lobby. So, ready? Session 5, toolkit for compensating patients and patient groups for the expert input, okay? Toolkit for compensating patient and patient group for the input. You go to CLIMPT. CLIMPT is across the bar, okay, at the end of the lobby. Session 6, metrics to determine the shared value of patient engagement, here, okay, plenary. Metrics, here. Session 7, creating future patient engagement tools, okay, that derives with what Stuart just explained today. It's on the room on the first floor, okay? Who didn't get it? Matthew, thank you very much. I knew you're a great colleague. So, toolkit for compensation, CLIMPT, okay, by the bar. You can note that. Metrics, it's here, creating the new tools, first floor. It's still on the website. We didn't take it out, okay? I'll be there tomorrow morning. Finger food now. Thank you.